So yeah, we've already been discussing some of this, Graham. We've been on a 2-day camping trip so far. Tomorrow will be 3. I'm walking through the Dela Falls trails. So far we've gone over some philosophers, and let's see what we got here. It's like, where are you starting here?
Well, I thought
I thought you were going to start on Thoreau.
Yeah. So, Ryan and I are on this 2-night camping trip in Dela Falls in Strathcona Provincial Park, and we've taken this opportunity to kind of reflect on the nature of nature, and as part of our podcast project, and I feel like it's a fitting context to have a philosophy podcast on this topic, because I feel like you and I can reflect on nature, I think in a manner that is both deep and broad in scope, by being in that environment that we're talking about, like by coming into sort of a intimate communion with nature. I feel like we're in a better position to reflect on it philosophically, and so that's why we're here. And we have a broad array of thinkers and philosophies that we want to talk about in understanding the nature of nature, and ranging from the ancient Greek to the Romantic to the more existential. And I think that these different schools of philosophies and the philosophers that are their spokespersons, I think, can really lend insight to our own thinking about nature and our relationship to it. So that's kind of our starting point. And I thought, in particular, Henry David Thoreau, the American transcendentalist philosopher, really lends himself well to this discussion, because he draws on, I think, elements of ancient Greek thought as well as Romantic thought, and a lot of these influences in him come together in sort of this transcendentalist philosophy, in which this essential principle of which is that our inner worlds and our outer worlds mirror one another. So that's kind of where I'd like to start off, Ryan. And I have sort of some talking points that we can address with regards to Thoreau. And I think the core notion in Thoreau is this notion that the wildness, which is a defining feature of nature, is redemptive in nature. And I think we see this accurately portrayed in his essay Walking, and in a specific phrase from that essay in particular. And I'll just quote what he says in that essay, but he says, "In wildness is the preservation of the world." So what he's getting at there is that nature is a moral and a metaphysical condition, and that wildness is not necessarily wilderness. And so, it's an aspect of our ethical way of seeing the world, and it's an aspect of nature itself, in the broadest sense, perhaps. And in this paper, he sort of gets into these core notions of transcendentalism, specifically this notion of nature as being a mirror to inner truth. So it's through inhabiting the natural world and participating in it, in which we kind of come to discover the truth of the world we live in, and maybe our own personal truths as well. And then a lot of what Thoreau says in this essay harks back to the Romantic tradition and this rebellion against industrial rationalism. And Thoreau and his contemporaries were in a world in which the Industrial Revolution was really taking off, and a lot of things made possible technology, like factories and mass production and stuff like that, were perceived by a lot of people as sort of degrading our human existence and lowering, the quality of our existence. And so thinkers like Thoreau were kind of part of this counter movement against that, and were endorsed the opposite view, that getting away from technological advances and returning to sort of the primordial earth and natural landscapes that we have evolved in is kind of the road to self-realization and to being a whole human being, So that's kind of the way I interpret Thoreau and see Thoreau, especially in that essay. So that's just kind of getting into it in broad brushstrokes, but I'd kind of be curious to get your take on all of that.
Yeah, well, let me follow up by asking maybe a few questions just to make sure I got your train of thought right.
Yeah.
So it sounds like what Thoreau is trying to convey is that there's some sort of alignment between the way that the human mind or the internal world of us as human beings is organized and the way that nature is organized. And when you spend time out in nature, there's some sort of redemptive quality in that, because when your inner world and external world align, you're able to access truth and morality. Like you're living in alignment with the way that, with your nature and with nature.
Yeah.
And I think Thoreau would see that as the same thing, like to live